The cold silence of space had always been oppressive. But as Captain Alara Dune stood before the control console of the human flagship Indomitable, she could feel something more profound in the air, an electric pulse, a sense of purpose that had been missing for centuries. For too long, humanity had been reduced to pawns in the game of galactic politics, cast aside by the great and ancient civilizations of the galaxy. But today, everything was about to change. Alara stared at the holographic map that displayed the coordinates of the abandoned planet they had just discovered, a world once home to a now extinct civilization known only as the Zelvorians. The Zelvorians had been mysterious and powerful, their empire spanning vast reaches of the galaxy until they mysteriously vanished eons ago. In their absence, many of their secrets had been lost, until now. The human resistance, working with underground scientists and scholars, had uncovered a Zelvorian vault hidden beneath the surface of this forgotten world. Inside it lay a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, the Heart of Eternity, a device capable of manipulating not just matter, but time itself. A voice broke her thoughts, sharp and focused. "Captain, we've received confirmation. The device is functional." Alara turned to face Lieutenant Kellen, her trusted second-in-command. His face was grim, but his eyes held a spark of something else, hope, or maybe something more dangerous. The Heart of Eternity could give humanity the power to overthrow their oppressors, to turn the tide of the galaxy's oppressive rule. It was the only chance they had, and yet, as with all great power, it carried its own risks. "Activate it," she said, her voice steady but betraying a hint of resolve. "We're going to make sure the galaxy knows we're not to be ignored anymore." Kellen nodded and tapped a series of buttons on the console. The air around them hummed with energy, the walls of the ship vibrating ever so slightly as the Heart of Eternity came online. The ship's systems flared to life, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire universe was holding its breath. As the weapon powered up, the stars outside the ship seemed to shimmer with an unusual intensity, as if acknowledging the beginning of something monumental. Alara could feel the weight of what they were about to do, but she could not afford hesitation. The weapon's power would be their first strike, a declaration to the galaxy that humanity would no longer stand idle. "Coordinates locked," Kellen announced. "We're ready to launch the first phase." Alara gave a sharp nod, her gaze fixed on the planet below. The Heart of Eternity could unleash devastation on a planetary scale. But what it could also do, what they hoped it could do, was far more dangerous. It had the potential to disrupt the very fabric of reality, to unravel the stranglehold the Council held over time and space itself. The Council had long since stripped humanity of its freedom, relegating them to the fringes of the galaxy, their potential suppressed by millennia of fear and disdain. The Zelvorians had been aware of this power, and they had hidden it away for a reason. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a key that could unlock the door to ultimate control. "Ready," Alara muttered to herself, as if whispering to the stars. The order was given. The Heart of Eternity fired. A blinding light engulfed the ship's viewports, a flash so brilliant it seemed to tear through the very fabric of space. As the beam shot out into the void, a ripple spread across the galaxy. The weapon's energy surged outward, reaching the heart of the Council's empire, igniting alarms across their heavily fortified systems. Humanity had just made its first move. But as the light of the weapon faded, the silence returned, more oppressive than ever. The galaxy was about to respond, and Alara knew that the consequences of this decision would either lead to their freedom or their annihilation. But one thing was certain: humanity's reckoning had begun. The aftermath of the Heart of Eternity's activation left the crew of Indomitable shaken, but the initial euphoria of their bold strike quickly gave way to a deep, unsettling tension. The plan had worked. Galactic communications were in chaos, and the Council's central command systems were disrupted. But as the months passed, the Resistance's momentum faltered. The Council retaliated with brutal efficiency, dispatching elite fleets to reclaim control of their lost territories. The human forces, emboldened by their early successes, found themselves stretched thin. The shadow of defeat loomed large. Alara stood on the command deck, her hands gripping the rail of the observation window as she gazed out at the void. The distant stars seemed dimmer now, as if the galaxy itself had grown colder. Each victory had brought them closer to the Council's heart, but the toll was beginning to show. Humanity had underestimated their enemies. The Council was far more cunning, far more entrenched than they had ever imagined. Captain, Kellen's voice broke through her thoughts. We've intercepted a message. It's strange. Alara turned to face him, her brow furrowed. What do you mean, strange? Kellen hesitated, then handed her a datapad. It's a transmission, encrypted with a Council-level code, but it wasn't sent by them. It's from someone inside the Resistance. Alara's heart skipped a beat. A traitor. She knew that betrayal had always been a risk, but to have someone inside their ranks, someone so high up, was a blow she hadn't prepared for. As the encryption crackled and the message played, her worst fears were confirmed. The weapon is too dangerous. If the heart of eternity reaches its full potential, the entire galaxy will fall into chaos. I have to stop them before it's too late, for everyone's sake. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind a trail of static and a rising dread. The voice was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakable. There was someone within the human resistance who not only doubted their cause, but sought to sabotage it. Alara clenched her fists. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to reconcile the words with the people she had trusted. Who among them would betray their cause? Was it someone from within her inner circle, or had they been infiltrated by the Council? I want all personnel to report in immediately, Alara ordered. We're hunting down a traitor. No one is above suspicion. The crew scattered, and soon, the Indomitable was abuzz with activity. Alara didn't have the luxury of doubt. She had to act quickly. If the traitor was one of her trusted officers, they were in even more danger. Trust was everything now, and with it shattered, everything was at risk. In the mess hall, whispers ran rampant as members of the Resistance began to suspect each other. Eyes darted around, and murmurs filled the air. Alara's sharp gaze cut through the crowd as she entered. Her presence was commanding, and the room fell silent. I won't stand for treachery, she announced, her voice a cold warning. Whoever this is, they will answer for their actions. We will find them. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and though Alara's words were meant to rally her crew, she could see the fear in their eyes. Fear not just of the Council, but of each other. Suspicion could destroy them from within before the Council ever had the chance. As the search intensified, Alara's own mind swirled with questions. Who had access to the heart of eternity's systems? Who could have the knowledge to sabotage their efforts? And most terrifying of all, who stood to gain the most by bringing them down from the inside? The crew's unity was crumbling, and Alara could feel the weight of it. The heart of eternity had given them hope, but now it seemed like that hope was being torn apart from within. She was forced to confront a painful truth. The galaxy's darkest forces weren't just those who opposed them. They could be among them, wearing the same face. She gritted her teeth. We will expose the traitor, she whispered to herself. And when we do, they will learn that humanity does not forgive. But in the back of her mind, a nagging thought took root. Was this betrayal just a sign of things to come? Could humanity truly rise without tearing itself apart? The weight of the answer hung in the air, more crushing than any enemy they had faced before. The rebellion was no longer just a war against the Council. It was a war for their very soul. The tension within the human resistance reached a boiling point after the traitor's message was uncovered. But even as suspicion ran rampant among the ranks, Alara Dune knew that the fight for survival wasn't just about internal strife. The true challenge lay ahead, the galaxy's other oppressed species. humanity wasn't the only one suffering beneath the heel of the Council. The decision to seek out these alien factions, long ignored by the Council's propaganda machine, was a calculated risk. Alara had no choice but to unite with those who shared her hatred for their common enemies. But forming an alliance with other species meant stepping into a web of old grudges, ancient rivalries, and cultural differences that threatened to tear the rebellion apart before it even truly began. The first of these races, the Drakari, were a brutal, warlike species whose planet had been plundered by the Council centuries ago. The Drakari were known for their savage strength and their unmatched skill in combat, but they had no love for humanity, who had once been allies of the Council in a desperate, doomed attempt to keep their own people safe. "We have no need for your promises, human," snarled Kakar, the Drakari leader, his eyes burning with contempt. His massive, reptilian form towered over the human diplomats. His people's fierce loyalty was not to anyone but themselves, and that made the idea of working with humanity even more distasteful. "You will not use us as your pawns. The Drakari fight for themselves, not for you." Alara stood firm, her gaze unwavering. She knew that their freedom was tied to the Drakari's willingness to fight alongside them. "We're not asking you to fight for us. We're offering you a chance to fight for something greater than your own vengeance. The Council's reign ends now. Help us, and we'll help you take back what's yours." For a long moment, Kakar simply stared at her. His people had suffered long enough under the Council's tyranny, but the bitter taste of betrayal was still fresh in their minds. It wasn't until one of his warriors, a younger Drakari named Vesra, stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute, that the balance began to shift. "We fight for the Drakari, yes," Vesra said, "but the Council is not our only enemy. We've seen how they've subjugated other species. I believe this human is right. Together, we can carve out a future that no one dares take from us again." Kakar growled low in his throat, but the spark of agreement was there. The Drakari were not ready to make an official alliance just yet, but the seed of cooperation had been planted. Next came the Nephids, a species of energy beings with a delicate and ethereal form, capable of manipulating time on a limited scale. The Nephids had long been hunted by the Council for their unique abilities, and though their technology was far superior in certain areas, their numbers were few. Their leader, Velcora, appeared before Alara in a shimmering form, her energy tendrils pulsing softly with light. "Human," she said, her voice echoing in Alara's mind, "you seek to dismantle the Council's hold on the galaxy. But understand this. Time is not a weapon to be wielded without consequence. It is an ocean, and the currents can drown even the mightiest." Alara met her gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. She knew the risk in asking for the Nephids' aid. They had no interest in petty revenge. Their motives were always rooted in the long-term balance of the universe. Yet Alara had a bargaining chip. "We don't want to use time as a weapon. We want to free those who've been trapped in its grip." Velcora hesitated, her shimmering tendrils swirling thoughtfully. "Then perhaps you will prove worthy of our aid." Finally, there were the Zordae, ancient engineers and mathematicians, whose technology had once rivaled the greatest empires of the galaxy. But the Zordae civilization had crumbled under the Council's shadow. They had withdrawn into isolation, guarding their knowledge with a fierce protectiveness. To earn their trust would require more than just words. It would require them to see the potential for something greater than the destruction they had witnessed for centuries. "Your people have forgotten the meaning of true power," said Zorath, the Zordaean Voy, his mechanical voice carrying an air of arrogance. "But we will not lend our expertise to a doomed cause. Prove to us you have the vision to rebuild, not just destroy." The negotiations were slow and fraught with tension, but the alliance, fragile as it was, began to take shape. For Alara, it was a daunting task, forcing her to navigate the complexities of each race's culture and history, while also keeping her human resistance from splintering further. As the various factions slowly began to align with the rebellion, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play than simple alliances. Each race had their own agenda, their own history with the Council, and their own way of seeking vengeance. For all the promise of unity, the galaxy had never been more divided, and the cracks in their fragile coalition were beginning to show. But she had no choice. Humanity needed them, and the only way forward was to trust that, together, they could dismantle the Council's centuries-old reign. But as the rebellion took its first steps toward unity, Alara couldn't help but wonder who among the new allies could they truly trust, and who might betray them when the time came. The alliance, tenuous at best, had begun to take shape, but the cracks that had formed beneath the surface were already showing. While the Drakari were eager to exact vengeance, the Niffids demanded caution, pushing for a strategy that could not afford to risk the fragile fabric of the universe itself. The Zorde remained aloof, evaluating the human rebellion with a detached curiosity, neither fully committed nor fully trusting. The unity Alara had hoped for was quickly dissolving into a series of fragile agreements, held together by nothing more than a shared desire to topple the Council. As the Indomitable sailed through the stars, bound for their next objective, a critical supply depot controlled by the Council, Alara gathered her closest advisors in the command center. She knew the upcoming assault would be pivotal in keeping the alliance together. Failure was not an option, not when so much was at stake. Everyone's on edge, Lieutenant Kellen said, his voice low but urgent. The Drakari are growing restless. They want to strike harder, faster. They're impatient, and I don't think they're buying the Nifid's cautious approach. Alara glanced at him, her mind already racing through the possibilities. The Drakari's anger was understandable, but rushing into battle without proper coordination could tear their fragile alliance apart before they had even secured their first victory. Yet she knew that giving the Drakari too much leeway would risk alienating the more cautious factions, and without their support, victory was impossible. "We'll need to find a middle ground," Alara said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of command. "We take the depot, but we do it carefully. The Niffids are right. We can't afford reckless moves. The Zorde have their own agenda. We need to keep them focused on the prize." "We're walking a razor's edge," Kellen muttered, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "If one faction falters, the whole thing will collapse." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of that truth press heavily on her chest. But there was no turning back now. The war for the galaxy's future could not be fought alone. It would require every faction, every ally, no matter how tenuous, working together if they were to stand a chance against the overwhelming might of the Council. As the fleet neared the supply depot, Alara prepared herself for the most delicate diplomatic maneuver of her life. The Drakari's impatience had already led them to take the first step toward mutiny, but she wasn't about to let them tear everything apart. "Captain," a voice crackled through the comms. It was Velcora, the Nifid leader. Her presence, once ethereal and calming, now seemed colder, more distant. "We will not engage unless the proper precautions are taken. The timeline you are suggesting will risk more than you can comprehend. If you push us too far, we will withdraw our support." Alara bit her lip, the pressure of her position mounting. "Understood, Velcora, but we cannot wait. We strike now, or the Council will reinforce their position before we can act." The response was chilling in its finality. "Then be prepared for the consequences of your choice." Before Alara could respond, the Drakari forces moved without warning. Kakar had taken the matter into his own hands, and in a flash of green fire, their ship surged forward, cloaked in the chaos of war. "Damn it," Alara muttered under her breath. "They've broken formation." She watched helplessly as Drakari warships, propelled by fury and decades of hatred, charged straight into the heart of the Council's defenses, bypassing the carefully planned strategy they had outlined just moments before. The rest of the fleet hesitated, caught in a moment of indecision. The Niffids and Zordae were unwilling to follow the Dracari's reckless charge, and the human ships were divided. Alara's control over the coalition was slipping, and the risk of disaster loomed large. "Hold your fire," she barked into the comms, but her orders were drowned out by the chaos unfolding. Dracari warriors, eager to plunge into battle, began launching their assaults without waiting for the coordinated attack. On the bridge, Kellen turned to her, his face grim. "We have no choice but to follow them in. If we don't, they'll leave us behind." A cold chill ran down Alara's spine as she realized the brutal truth. This wasn't just a battle for the depot. It was a test of her leadership, of her ability to keep the fragile alliance from falling apart under pressure. "We go in, full force," she ordered, her voice ironclad. "But we do it on our terms. Everyone follows my lead, or we'll be fighting this war alone." As the Indomitable broke from formation, Alara's heart pounded in her chest. They were heading straight into the firestorm, but it was the only way to prevent total collapse. She couldn't afford to lose the trust of the Niffids and the Zordae now. She would have to thread the needle, keeping her forces aligned while maintaining the illusion of unity. But as the first salvo from the Dracari hit their targets, Alara's instincts screamed that they had crossed a line. Victory or defeat, there would be no middle ground this time. The fate of the rebellion and the galaxy itself hinged on what happened next. The Indomitable surged forward, its hull vibrating as the weapon systems engaged. Alara's hands were steady on the command console, but her heart pounded as she watched the chaos unfold on the holocom screens. The Dracari had charged into the heart of the Council's defenses, but now they had provoked a storm, one that would be difficult to weather. Council warships, sleek and heavily armored, retaliated with ruthless precision. Their artillery barrage slammed into the Dracari ships, ripping through their shields with terrifying ease. The Dracari, undeterred by the losses, pressed forward, but their ferocity was now met with overwhelming force. Every move felt like a gamble, and the fragile alliance teetered on the edge of collapse. "Captain, the Dracari fleet is taking heavy fire," Kellen reported urgently, his eyes fixed on the tactical readout. "They're holding, but not for long." Alara's mind raced. She knew that their best chance of winning this battle was unity, but unity was already slipping through her fingers. The Niffids, despite their earlier hesitations, had joined the fight, but they were slow to act, unwilling to fully commit to the chaos. The Zordae had remained passive, observing, calculating. None of them had trusted her to lead them into battle, at least not in the way she had hoped. Yet if they faltered now, the Dracari would fall, and with them, the rebellion's chance at victory. "We need to flank them," Alara said, her voice low but commanding. "Kellen, coordinate with the Niffids. We can't afford to wait any longer. Tell them to move now." Kellen nodded, his fingers flying across the console. "Understood. But if we go in now, the Dracari will be exposed. We need to pull them back." "I'm not pulling them back," Alara snapped. "We push forward, and we do it together. If we don't, the Council will bury us." The seconds felt like hours as the situation rapidly escalated. The Council's fleet was expertly maneuvering, using their superior numbers and firepower to systematically dismantle the Dracari. The Alliance's forces were fragmented, fighting in disarray, and every missed shot, every lost ship, was a reminder of the stakes. Then, as if on cue, the Niffids struck. Their ships materialized in a shimmer of light, facing through space with unnatural grace. They bent the fabric of time itself, slowing the Council's vessels just long enough for the human and Dracari forces to capitalize on the opening. The tides of battle shifted, but not enough to guarantee victory. "Now," Alara barked, her voice cold and sharp. "All units engage. Bring those bastards down." The Indomitable launched its first salvo, the cannons roaring with destructive power. The Council's ships, already staggered by the Niffids' temporal manipulation, were suddenly under fire from multiple directions. Drakari warships, their energy shields flickering under the barrage, retaliated with savage intensity, their weapons cutting through the opposition with brutal force. But as the battle raged, Allura's attention was divided. On the edge of the battlefield, a new threat emerged, Council reinforcements arriving far quicker than they had anticipated. A massive fleet of Dreadnought-class warships, each one a towering fortress of weaponry, appeared from the shadows of the nearby asteroid belt. It was a final push, an effort to crush the rebellion before it could gain a foothold. "This isn't over yet," Kellen muttered under his breath as he read the incoming data. "The Council isn't going to let us win this easily." Allura's mind raced. The reinforcements were well beyond what they had planned for. They had to deal with this new threat, but the Alliance's forces were already stretched thin. The Drakari were on the verge of breaking, the Niffids were hesitant, and the Zordai, still silent, offered no support. "We need to take down their command ships," Allura ordered, her voice steady despite the panic building in her chest. "We take out their leader, we cripple their coordination." "Captain," Kellen said, looking up with a worried expression, "we don't have the firepower to do that. We'll be overwhelmed." "We don't have a choice," Allura said through gritted teeth. "If we don't destroy their command structure now, they'll destroy us." The fleet, already in the midst of chaos, fell into a deeper frenzy. The Indomitable led the charge, its weapon systems blasting through the Council's defensive lines. Allura watched the screen intently, her fingers pressed against the console, hoping, praying, that their gamble would pay off. The Drakari, despite their earlier misgivings, followed suit, rallying to their side with renewed fury. The Niffids, now fully committed to the fight, bent time in their favor, making the Council ships move slower, giving them precious seconds to strike. Even the Zordai, though hesitant, launched a series of devastating energy pulses from their ships. The war had truly begun. But even as their forces battered the Council's line, Allura felt the weight of the battle settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just a fight for freedom, it was a fight for their very survival. The Council's war machine was vast, and they had only just begun to realize the price of defying it. The outcome of this battle would decide everything. But in the heart of the storm, Allura could only think of one thing: they could not afford to fail. Not now, not ever. The Indomitable was a vessel of chaos now, its hull shaking with every explosion, its crew focused and determined but stretched to their limits. Allura stood at the heart of the battle, the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. Each command she issued felt like a calculated risk. They had forced their way into the heart of the Council's defenses, but with the reinforcements arriving so quickly, they were running out of time. "Captain, the Drakari forces are beginning to retreat," Kellen reported, his voice strained with urgency. "They're taking heavy losses. They won't be able to hold out much longer." Allura's eyes narrowed as she scanned the tactical readout. The Drakari, fierce and proud, were beginning to falter. Their ferocity had been their strength, but their strategy, if it could even be called that, was beginning to break apart under the Council's superior tactics. The Niffids, meanwhile, had pulled back slightly, uncertain of their place in the chaos. Velkor's voice had been silent for too long, and Allura feared the Niffids might soon withdraw entirely. "Tell them to hold their ground," Allura snapped. "We cannot lose them now." Kellen hesitated but nodded, relaying the order. The Niffid ships, their shimmering forms pulsing with energy, hesitated before surging back into the fray. For a moment, Allura thought they might turn the tide. Their ability to manipulate time, though limited, was invaluable in disrupting the Council's precision, buying her forces precious moments to strike. But the arrival of the Council's reinforcements had tilted the scale even further. The Zordai, who had been hovering on the sidelines, observing, had finally made a move. Their ships unleashed an onslaught of energy blasts that tore through the Council's lines with devastating precision. But there was no glory in their assault, no thrill of battle. The Zordae's tactics were cold, calculated. They didn't fight for vengeance or for the thrill of war. They fought because it was necessary to preserve the balance of the galaxy. Yet, despite their overwhelming firepower, their strike wasn't enough. The Council's dreadnoughts were immense, their armor thick, their weapons relentless. The forces of the rebellion, despite their newfound unity, were falling short. And then, just as Alara began to wonder if victory was slipping through their fingers, a voice crackled over the comms. It was the unmistakable sound of Kakar, the Drakari leader. "We will not fall back," he growled, his voice dripping with fury. "The Council will learn to fear the Drakari. We will make them pay for every drop of blood." Alara's heart sank. She had hoped to preserve the alliance, but Kakar's defiance had pushed him to the breaking point. His people were dying, too many had already fallen, but his pride was unyielding. The Drakari had never been known for surrender, but now their desperation might cost them everything. The battlefield was becoming a slaughter, and Alara could sense the fractures beginning to deepen. The Drakari, driven by vengeance, were too reckless. The Niffids were growing increasingly distant, their focus split between the physical battle and their own internal dilemmas. The Zordae, though powerful, were uninterested in the chaos of war. They were focused on the bigger picture, the one beyond this single battle. Alara stood frozen, trying to make sense of the mess before her. The rebellion was on the brink. She had made the hard choice to unite these forces, but now the consequences of that decision were clear. Without cohesion, without mutual trust, the alliance would crumble before the Council even knew what hit them. Her gaze turned to the comms console, where Kellen's voice came through once more. "Captain, the Drakari are pushing too far. They're overextending their position. If we don't reinforce them now, they'll be wiped out." But Alara knew it wasn't just the Drakari that needed help. The entire rebellion was on the verge of collapse. The Niffids were questioning their involvement, the Zordae were pulling away, and the Drakari were too lost in their own rage to see the bigger picture. If she couldn't find a way to unite them, now the Council would win by default. "Send a message to Kakar," Alara said, her voice hardening. "Tell him he either pulls back now or we will leave him to his fate. I can't afford to lose the entire rebellion over his pride." There was silence on the other end before Kellen spoke again. "Captain, you know he won't listen." "I know," Alara said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she turned back to the tactical display. "But I'm not asking for his permission. I'm ordering it." The battle raged around them, the sounds of destruction echoing through the Indomitable as it cut through the heart of the Council's defenses. But in the heart of that chaos, Alara knew that the rebellion wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for the future of the galaxy. And if she couldn't bring her allies back from the brink, then all of this, every sacrifice, every life lost, would have been in vain. As the Council's reinforcements closed in, Alara realized the truth. The rebellion's greatest enemy was no longer the Council, it was themselves. The Indomitable shuddered under the relentless barrage as it pressed forward, cutting through the debris of broken ships and disintegrating war zones. Alara's hands gripped the edge of her console, her mind a whirlwind of calculations, decisions, and consequences. The battle had reached a fever pitch. Ships were crumbling under fire, entire sectors of space were ablaze, and every moment of hesitation threatened to unravel everything they had fought for. Kellen's voice broke through the chaos. "Captain, Kakar's fleet is ignoring your orders. They're moving toward the heart of the Council's defense lines. If they keep pushing like this, they'll be trapped." Alara's heart tightened. She had feared this moment. The Drakari, consumed by their lust for vengeance, had disregarded any strategy or command that didn't serve their desire for retribution. Kakar had crossed a line. He wasn't just jeopardizing the rebellion, he was about to hand victory to the Council on a silver platter. "Damn it," Alara muttered under her breath. "Tell him to fall back. Now, or we'll abandon him." There was a long pause before Kellen responded. "He's not responding to our messages. It's like he's gone mad." Alara's pulse quickened. She knew the Drakari were a proud and stubborn people, but this was more than that. Cocker's madness was a dangerous catalyst, threatening to ignite not only his own fleet's destruction, but the collapse of the entire rebellion. "I'll deal with him," Alara said, her voice like steel. "Prepare to open a direct channel." As she initiated the communication, a crackling sound filled the air, and then Cocker's voice came through, laden with contempt. "I did not fight for your unity, Alara. I fight because the council must fall, and I will not stop until every last one of them has paid for their crimes." Alara's eyes narrowed, a mix of frustration and resolve building inside her. "Cocker, if you don't fall back immediately, we'll be forced to leave you behind. I won't sacrifice the entire rebellion for your personal vendetta. The council will wipe you out, and then they'll come for the rest of us. If you want victory, stop throwing your life away." There was a long silence. For a moment, Alara thought he might ignore her altogether. But then, finally, Cocker's voice came through again, this time tinged with cold fury. "You do not command me, human. I'll finish this battle my way." Before she could respond, the comms were abruptly cut off, leaving Alara staring at the empty screen. Her mind was racing, adrenaline and anger surging through her veins. She had tried to hold the alliance together, but Cocker's arrogance and blind rage threatened to tear it all apart. "Captain," Kellen said, voice laced with concern, "if he continues like this, we won't be able to save him, and we'll lose any chance of winning." She turned to face him, her expression hard. "I know, but we can't afford to let him destroy everything we've built." Suddenly, the entire ship jolted as a massive explosion rocked their flank. Alara stumbled but caught herself on the edge of the console, her eyes locked on the tactical map. The Drakari fleet had overextended itself, drawing the full wrath of the Council's dreadnoughts. Their ships were being torn apart, one by one, the mighty Drakari fleet now on the brink of annihilation. "We can't wait any longer," Alara said, her voice urgent. "Prepare the fleet. We're going in to rescue them. We're not losing this war to one stubborn leader." She issued the command, and the Indomitable surged forward. Her heart pounded as she watched the trajectory of their course, knowing full well that this could be their last chance. If they didn't act now, the rebellion would be wiped from existence, and the council would remain in control, unchallenged and unopposed. With the fleet rallying behind her, Alara led the charge toward the Drakari's vulnerable flank, cutting through enemy lines with ruthless precision. The Niffids, seeing the risk of total collapse, followed their cue, and their ships flickered in and out of existence as they phased through time, slowing the council's vessels just enough for the rebels to strike back. For a brief moment, it seemed that victory might be within reach. The Drakari, though battered, rallied behind their remaining forces, using their ferocity and stubbornness to hold off the council's retaliation. But as the battle raged, it became clear that the struggle was far from over. Every victory came at a cost. For every council ship destroyed, 2 rebel ships were lost. The galaxy was bleeding, and the cost of freedom was becoming unbearable. "Cocker's flagship is going down," Kellen shouted, his eyes wide with shock. "We can't reach it in time." The Drakari flagship, the Wrath of Vengeance, was engulfed in flames. Cocker's pride had led him to push too far, and now it was costing him, and his people, everything. Alara's mind raced. The loss of the Wrath would mean more than the fall of one ship. It would be the end of the Drakari's will to fight. The rebellion's fragile unity would shatter, and all would be lost. But there was no time for regret. "Push forward," she yelled into the comms, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We win this together, or we lose everything, no one left behind." The Indomitable and the remaining rebel forces fought on, with Alara at the helm, her focus unyielding. This was the final stand. She could feel the tipping point beneath her, and she knew the next move would either shatter the rebellion or secure their future. And with Cocker's flagship falling, it was clear there was no turning back. The battle had devolved into chaos, the last remnants of the rebellion fighting with everything they had left. The sky itself seemed to burn as the shattered remains of warships drifted through the debris, their hulls torn open by relentless fire. The Indomitable had taken heavy damage, but it still held firm, its crew still fighting, their spirit unbroken. Alara stood at the command station, her mind sharp and focused, even as exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. They had pushed forward to rescue the Drakari, but now, as Cocker's flagship, the Wrath of Vengeance, sank into the abyss of space, the question remained, could they still win? Could this fragile alliance hold long enough to crush the Council's iron grip on the galaxy? "Captain," Kellen said, voice tight with urgency. "We've lost communication with most of the Drakari fleet. It's just us, the Nephids, and what's left of the Zorday forces. The Council's reinforcements are still arriving in waves." Alara's eyes never left the screen, her fingers gripping the console with cold determination. "We push forward. We fight until every last ship is burned to the ground. No retreat, no surrender." Her voice was hard, and for the first time in this entire war, she saw the resolve in her crew's eyes, a shared understanding. They had nothing left but each other, and for the first time, that might be enough. Kellen's voice broke the momentary silence, his tone quieter now. "Captain, Cockar, he didn't have to die like this. We could have saved him." Alara didn't answer immediately. The truth was, Cockar had pushed too far, consumed by his need for vengeance, and he had brought his people to the brink of destruction. He had chosen his path, one that had led him to ruin. Alara had hoped the Drakari would see the bigger picture, but it seemed their pride and rage had clouded their judgment. They had failed to unite, and now the price was being paid in blood. "We don't have the luxury of regrets," Alara said finally. "We have to finish this, or his death, and all the others, will mean nothing." She turned to the tactical display, her eyes scanning the now fractured battle lines. The Council was closing in, their forces overwhelming in both numbers and firepower. But there was something in the air, a feeling that this final stand wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for something far bigger: freedom, justice, and the future of the galaxy. "Let's finish this," Alara whispered to herself before giving the order. The Indomitable led the charge. The Nephids moved in tandem, their ships flickering in and out of existence, manipulating time to throw off the precision of the Council's warships. The Zorday, ever detached but now fully committed, unleashed a final wave of energy pulses, tearing through the Council's lines with devastating efficiency. Alara's heart raced as the Indomitable tore into the enemy's flank, cannons blazing. They were outnumbered, but their resolve was stronger than ever. The chaos of the battle seemed to fade into a singular focus, every blast, every strike, every maneuver leading to this moment. For Alara, it was more than just a war, it was a culmination of everything humanity had fought for. This was their stand, their justice for millennia of oppression. And then, as if answering her silent plea, a break in the Council's line appeared. The reinforcements had underestimated the resilience of the rebels. The enemy's tactics had been flawless, but their hubris was their downfall. The Zorday's energy pulses, coupled with the Nephid's temporal manipulation, had created an opening wide enough for the final push. Now, Alara shouted, "For the galaxy!" With that, the Indomitable plunged into the heart of the Council's flagship, its remaining cannons aimed directly at the control center. The force of the impact was enough to send shockwaves through the enemy fleet, but there was no time to celebrate. The Indomitable was critically damaged, its hull buckling under the strain of sustained fire, but Alara knew this was their last chance. Kellen's voice cut through the comms. "The Council flagship is disabled. Their command structure is in disarray." Alara could scarcely believe it. They had done it. Against all odds, they had shattered the Council's core. The rebel forces rallied, pouring every last ounce of firepower into the disoriented Council ships. And one by one, the dreadnoughts fell. The rebellion had triumphed. But even in the face of victory, Alara could not forget the cost. The Drakari had been lost. Cocker's arrogance had claimed countless lives. But perhaps in the end, his sacrifice would serve as a reminder of what was at stake, a war for the future, not just for revenge. As the remaining council ships scattered or surrendered, Alara stood, breathless but resolute. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. And the rebellion, now forged in the fires of sacrifice, had won not just for themselves, but for all who had suffered under the Council's rule. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was free. Alara's final thought as she gazed out at the stars was simple. They had won, but the real work was just beginning.